With a half dozen possible top 100 picks and one possible first rounder, I'm breaking down the top non-Power 5 draft prospects. With multiple possible top 100 picks and one possible first rounder, I'm breaking down the top non-Power 5 prospects at each position in the 2024 NFL Draft.
This is Renner Ranks, the ultimate NFL ranking show. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into today's episode of Renner Ranks, your go-to daily rankings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And a special shout out to all the everydayers out there for making Renner Ranks your first listen. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, like YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. And I, of course, am your host, Mike Renner, NFL draft analyst over at The Messenger. Today's podcast is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's right. Top small school prospect at every single position in the 2024 NFL draft class. Now, obviously, the deadline to declare is still a month away. We may see some of these names return to school. Some cannot. Obviously, we'll discuss that when we get there. They are out of eligibility, but we're going to go through position by position, rank the top guy. If there's some others that deserve consideration, we'll give some shout outs to them to highlight them, but mainly focus on who the top guy, I believe, is at every single position from a non-Power 5 program. Transfer portal, NIL, really hampering kind of the talent we're seeing coming out of non-Power 5 programs. As soon as guys get identified as possible NFLers, they move up the ranks, right? I mean, you're seeing it again and again, whether it's guys like Jared Verse from Florida State, who's a first rounder, transferred from Albany, or whether it's his teammate Braden Fisk, the defensive tackle there at Florida State, who could be a top 100 pick in his own right, who transferred from Western Michigan to Florida State this past year. So when a guy really has the goods, oftentimes before they make that leap to the NFL, nowadays we're seeing them go to Power 5 programs. But that's not always the case. And as we'll see with some of these guys, some of them may very well still be top 100 picks. So let's get right into the rankings. Quarterback position first, where Tulane's Michael Pratt is, to me, the clear top non-Power 5 quarterback in this class. And now, if this wasn't a loaded quarterback class, I'm sure you've heard it by now, and it's going to be even loaded, even if a lot of the guys that are getting, quote unquote hype, like maybe your JJ McCarthy's of the world, may return to school to be in next year's class. Even with that, there's still going to be a lot of names. So if it were a lesser class, say if this were 2 years ago, the 2022 version, that was Kenny Pickett, that was Desmond Ridder, that class, Michael Pratt in that class would have been right in that mix, right? He would have been a guy who would have been getting whispers as, maybe a top 50 pick in a class like that, because he is toolsy, because he really does tick a lot of the boxes that you want to see from an NFL prospect. He ticks, the Bill Parcells box, the 4-year starter, started every single year of his Tulane career ever since he was a true freshman back in 2020, got better every single year, and was a winner. I mean, the last 2 years, 12-2 record, 11-2 record. One of those losses actually wasn't even on him. He was actually out this year, unfortunately, for the Ole Miss game, which was one of their losses and would have been probably the biggest stage he would have gotten in his entire career. But you still see a lot to like. Big arm, can attack down the football field, a little bit of an elongated release, but at 6'3", 220, the size is there. The athleticism is there to break the pocket, make plays outside. Not really a high-end athlete, but definitely an athlete. And I do think with the success of Brock Purdy and kind of how he elevated Iowa State, and maybe he wasn't the toolsiest of guys, but was a winner at a program that was historically a loser in Iowa State, I think you're going to see NFL evaluators trend towards those guys. Tulane, prior to Michael Pratt, hadn't won double-digit games since 1998. It had been a while since that program was anywhere near relevant nationally. And to take them to, again, double-digit wins his junior and senior season, I do think has to be part of the evaluation process that sticks out, part of something that, like, you say, hey, a guy like that isn't supposed to do what he did at a program like that. So I do think there's a very good chance he ends up a day 2 pick, even in a deep class. And I do think with the rash of injuries you're seeing at the quarterback position this year, I think a lot more GMs are going to say, we need a guy in case our guy isn't the guy anymore. If that made any sense whatsoever. In case our guy goes down, we need a guy to develop in the background, because we can't be left holding our you-know-what should our quarterback miss 4 or 5 weeks of the season nowadays. I just think it's such a premium position, and there's so much in that second kind of tier of talent at the quarterback position nowadays, whether it's, that kind of tier of 20 through 40 in terms of quality starters in the NFL. It seems like that tier is growing by the year, that if you really are forced to start a Tim Boyle, you're screwed. Like there's better options. There's far better options out there. And there's going to be a lot more better options in this upcoming draft class. Let's go to running back position, where Kimani Vidal out of Troy is a name you need to familiarize yourself with if you are an NFL draft fan or an NFL fan or a dynasty fan or whatever, because I think this guy is uber talented. I think he may very well end up a top 5 back on my board in the 2024 NFL draft class, depending on testing, how he shows out at whatever all-star game he ends up going to after the season. But he's 5'8", 218 pounds, and he's a dead ringer from a body type perspective to Blake Corum over at Michigan, right? Like those are very similar builds. They're squatty. They are rocked up to the gills, and it's difficult to tackle guys like that. One, because, from a just mass perspective, like a muscle per square inch perspective, they're built like 240 pounders who are 6 foot, right? Their density is high for the position. And then when you have that low center of gravity that those guys do, they can stop, start, and cut on dimes that the taller guys really cannot. And so this past year for Troy, 278 attempts, 1,582 yards, 14 scores, 85 broken tackles per PFF. And I love his acceleration. I mean, when he hits the hole, he broke a lot of angles from linebackers at the second level, safeties at the third level of the defense, that all he needs a crease, and that guy looked shot out of a cannon when he hit it. So I think a lot of, there's a lot of bigger name running backs out there, a lot of bigger school running backs out there that obviously a lot of people are familiar with, but his tape is better than a lot of those guys who, a lot of people are penciling in to, again, top 5, top 10 positions in this running back class. I really like this guy. I think he could make himself some money in the transfer portal if he decided to come back to school for another year, which I believe he has 1 more year of eligibility, even though he's been playing ever since true freshman there in 2020 at Troy. But he put it off on tape this year that I think he could be coveted, maybe not necessarily top 100 just because of the way of the world of running backs and how they get drafted, but definitely early on day 3 if he does declare. Big fan of his game. There's a couple other guys worth mentioning here. I think Isaiah Davis of South Dakota State, definitely a draftable running back, big size. You've probably heard of him in the past if you're a close fan of FCS football at all. And then Dylan Lobby from New Hampshire, a guy who went for almost 300 receiving yards earlier this year against Central Michigan. Definitely one of the best receiving backs in this draft class. Not necessarily a power back, a little on the smaller side, just over 200 pounds, but he will be at the Senior Bowl. Very excited to check him out there, especially in the receiving one-on-ones. Let's get to the wide receiver position, where this one was hotly contested. I think there's 3 guys who, depending on how their pre-draft process goes and depending on how kind of this wide receiver class shakes out, because, again, another super deep position, I think could all end up top 100 picks. And now when you're projecting the back end of the top 100, it's a crapshoot, right? Like those picks 80 through 100 every single year, there's a bunch of flyers out there. There's a bunch of names that always, floor me. I go back to when the Patriots picked 2 tight ends in that area of the draft, and I was like, what the heck just happened in that? And obviously, I think both those tight ends are now currently not even in the NFL, and that was only a handful of years ago. So can never hard to project, but guys who, in my opinion, have that kind of talent. One is Western Kentucky's Malachi Corley. Guy's built like a running back, perfect for a slot receiver. Definitely gives Amari Rodgers-esque vibes, but a little bit better after the catch than Amari Rodgers was. But that's kind of build you're working with in Western Kentucky's Malachi Corley. You have Colorado State's Torrey Horton. If you recall back to that insane game early in the season, I believe it was a Friday nighter against Colorado. He had a tremendous catch on the sideline, shoestring hanging out of bounds. Is great after the catch as well. A little bit on the skinnier side, but he's been super productive. But for my money, the best non-Power 5 wide receiver prospect in this class is none other than Ricky White of UNLV. Man went for 81 catches, 1,390 yards, 7 scores in a breakout campaign in not a super pass heavy offense. He averaged 3.93 yards per route run this past season. He is a unique dude. So he started his career at Michigan State, freshman year 2020. I believe Michigan State in 2020 had him, Jaden Reed, and I guess not Keon Coleman. Keon Coleman would have been 1 year later. But they have him and Jaden Reed on that team back in 2020. And he actually played a good deal of snaps for them. 103 receiving snaps, 223 yards as a true freshman. Falls out of favor, transfers to UNLV. And then this year, breakout senior, 4th-year campaign, he moves uniquely. Like he has a flexibility to his lower half that's difficult to coach. He very much can stop, start very easily, cut on a dime, and kind of has that shake to him that you need to make guys miss to get off press coverage at the next level. And then he just has such easy speed. I mean, his average depth of target, 12.5 yards down the football field, was a big play type of wide receiver, 17.2 yards per reception. And kind of just when he got a step, he just glides away from guys. I'm very curious to see what he's going to run in the 40-yard dash, because I didn't see anyone really catch him from behind when he didn't want to be caught this year on tape. So obviously going against Mountain West corners, a little different from Power 5, NFL corners. So we'll see if he does end up, because he hasn't accepted any invite or hasn't declared for the draft even yet. If he does end up going to a postseason showcase game, we shall see there. But I'm a big fan of this guy's just talent level. I think there's a lot to work with. Like, he definitely could be a high-end starter at the next level with what he brings to the table physically. Now, he's really rough around the edges again. Like, there's the drop issues in his past are vast. Now, this year they weren't as drastic, but 9 drops on 60 catchable in 2022, 3 drops on 13 catchable back in 2020 for Michigan State. So there's a lot of boom or bust to his tape, but there's a lot to like just from what he can do as an athlete. And at the wide receiver position, it's skill and athleticism. And he's kind of like, he flashes skill in waves. Like he's not a complete project, but there's definitely some weird aspects to his game where you're just like, you see reps and you're just like, it's like, he's just inconsistent, I think is probably the best way to describe him at this point. Maybe that means he comes back to school for 2024. Now, before we get to the tight end position here, today's podcast is brought to you by DoorDash. Whenever the game clock stops, that's when it's time to order in with DoorDash. Order chips, dips, nachos, or everything you need to make your own nachos on DoorDash and get it all delivered without missing the game. Kick back at kickoff with unbeatable deals on everything you need for the watch, party, or tailgate. Score football season's best deals on groceries, restaurants, retail, and more. I know myself, I'll be going to get wings here tonight. Wings here in Nashville, not quite as good as the wings in Cincy, but there's some places that aren't too bad. Now on DoorDash, get 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. That's 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order and download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Subject to change. Terms apply. All right, tight end. Colorado State's Dallin Holker is your top FCS tight end. If you remember the tight end episode, he was a top 5 player on my tight end rankings. I don't see that changing from now until the NFL draft. Now, obviously, that depends. How that could change is him measuring in much smaller than expected, listed at 6'4", 235. That's obviously borderline size for a tight end at the next level. You probably minimum would like to see a guy 5+ more pounds to just get respected at the next. Once he gets to the NFL as an inline blocker. The frame, though, it looks like he could. I don't think there's anything really stopping him from. Now, he took a 2-year Mormon mission because he started his career at BYU, 2-year mission right in the middle of his college football career. That obviously is not going to help you keep on weight. I remember when we interviewed Tanner McKee, the former Stanford quarterback, about his Mormon mission in Brazil. He said, I walked 10+ miles a day. I didn't have any weights. I didn't have nutrition like we do in college football programs. I lost a bunch of muscle. So I think Dallin Holker the frame's there to put it on. I think it's just a matter of time before he gets to legitimate size, and you can't teach this guy's athletic ability, ball skills. He caught a Hail Mary game winner against Boise State earlier this year off a deflection. That was pretty nasty. If you haven't seen it, definitely go look for that. He is, truthfully, I think he should be a top 100 pick. He's going to be a top 100 player on my board just because that skill at that size is tougher to get to than him adding 10 plus pounds of muscle, right? I think I can buy into him getting big enough to get to respectable tight end weight at the NFL level than I can someone becoming dynamic, a dynamic receiving threat the way he is. So this past year led all college tight ends with 64 catches, 766 yards, and 15 broken tackles. Dude's a player. He may be the best pure receiving option in the tight end class after Brock Bowers. Like if you told me he's the second most productive receiving tight end in this draft class after Bowers, I would not bat an eye. Wouldn't bat an eye. Let's get to the offensive line, where there's actually two guys who I feel very confident will be top 100 picks in this offensive line class. One at tackle in Yale's Kiran Amegadjie. Hopefully I said that right. But if you watch his tape at Yale, he's 6'5", 326 pounds, already committed to the Senior Bowl. Already accepted an invite, accepted an invite. It's not like he signed a letter of intent there. He is a specimen, man. This guy's combination of length, I think over 35-inch arms, explosiveness, off the charts. The starting point that he has from a pure physical, what he can do, is high end. So I'm very excited to see him because on tape at Yale, it's kind of like, honestly, it's very similar to watching D3 tape. It's probably a little step above, but you're just not challenged by anything close to the physical prowess you're going to see at, high-end Power 5, NFL. It's not there. So he's just utterly dominant in what he brings to the table. Just can win with no technique whatsoever if he wants to. And so, you can almost throw that out the window for basically how coachable is he down at Senior Bowl in Mobile? How confident does he rebound from bad reps? Because they're going to happen. You're not going to be perfect going from that level of football all of a sudden to guys who are playing in the NFL next year. It's just impossible to do so if you've never seen it. So if he ticks all the boxes there, if he looks good, I could see him being a second rounder. I could see him being a high second rounder even. That's how good this dude's. That's how, that's the kind of athlete we're working with in Amegadjie. Other one on the offensive line class that you got to familiarize yourself with is Christian Haynes from Connecticut. Now, obviously, doing non-Power 5 schools kind of tripped me up when I was like, oh, Houston is now Power 5. Connecticut now not Power 5. Cincy Power 5 with all the reshuffling going on in college football. But Christian Haynes, right guard for Connecticut, he may be, he may not be the highest drafted guy on this list, but I could see him being the second highest drafted guy on this list. We'll get to the highest drafted guy on this list here in a little bit. I could see him being a top 50 pick, a second rounder in time. Again, another guy's going to the Senior Bowl. Ideal guard build. He's 6'2", 313 pounds, but long arms for a guard, knows how to use them well, plays extremely well on the move. I think he's going to test out as a plus athlete. Maybe not anything special athletically, but guard's not really a position where, elite versus high end. Like you just want a guy to be good, solid athletically. He's more than that. And then his hand usage every single year of his career got better. I'm a big fan of his game. He may end up the top true guard on my board here this upcoming spring. All right, let's flip to the defensive side of the ball. But before we do that, today's podcast is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. PrizePicks offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts player projections up to 25% to provide even more value. LeBron James is loving it. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LOCKEDONNFL for a first deposit match of up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports, made easy. All right, let's get to the defensive line, where the top defensive tackle I see from non-Power 5 is Evan Anderson from FAU. Defensive tackle, 6'3", 326, squatty, nose tackle, already very solid against the run, very consistent in that regard. Not a super high-end athlete. Reminds me kind of like a Derek Nottie type, if you remember him coming out of FSU, where you're getting a kind of one-dimensional player. So that's already going to kind of knock his draft stock. But I think in that regard, he can be an impact type of player. He can be a guy that you're starting on early downs consistently. And now he's going to the Shrine Bowl. We'll have to get a chance to prove himself there. But this past year, 22 run stops. I think every single year of his career, you've seen him defend the run at a high level. 4-year starter. Just a lot to like. Very clear-cut projection. Also give a shout-out to Kent State's CJ West, another draftable prospect who's probably a little bit more of an all-around defensive tackle, but those two guys probably the cream of your defensive tackle crop outside the Power 5. Defensive end, this guy's a little more intriguing. Elijah Roberts from SMU. Played 3 years at Miami. Rode kind of the pines there. Rotational player. Transfers to SMU and just dominates this past year. 64 pressures. Inside, outside. He's 6'4", 278 pounds. Has power in his hands. Has violence. Plays a physical game, and then he's got a little agility. I don't think he's a super high-end athlete, but he has that twitch laterally to get around guards, get around tackles. Once he bats their hands away, can then close to the quarterback. So he had a big season. Would not surprise me. One, if he came back to school, because only 1 year of production with another year of eligibility, may want to prove it once again. Or two, if he ends up a top 100 pick, because that's how good this guy's tape was. A few other small school defensive ends who at least will get drafted, could even go higher than, late day 3. Colorado State's Mo Kamara, Western Michigan's Marshawn Nealand, and Houston Christian's Jalix Hunt, all guys who definitely have draftable grades on at this point. All right, to the linebacker position, where this guy is one of the most under the radar players. There's a handful of guys. I said Kimani Vidal from Troy, I really like. Ricky White from UNLV, haven't heard much hype from him. Really like. Another guy here in UTEP's Tyrice Knight that I haven't heard a ton of hype for that I really like. Now, he did make my top 5 linebackers. I'd put him just outside that top 5, but he's 6'2", 235. I love his balance when taking on blocks. Like, he can shed and then still make plays. You see a lot of linebackers who are these high-end athletes who then fail at the next level. And you're like, why did they fail? Well, they couldn't do the simple thing that is how you make plays at the NFL level, which is defeat a block and then close to a ball carrier. It's not as easy as it sounds, because it's a violent sort of interaction that a lot of guys can't then stay athletes after they engage a block, right? They can't do that and then do something else. It takes coordination that Tyrice Knight definitely has. It's why he led all of college football this year in PFF's defensive stop metrics, which are obviously tackles that lead to success for the defense. Wouldn't be surprised if he's a top 100 pick. I believe he's already committed or accepted an invite to the Senior Bowl, and just a real steady, solid game. Good athlete, not an elite athlete by any means. That's why you're probably not going to see him drafted super highly, but 3-down potential and a guy with just not too many weaknesses on tape besides obviously level of competition at this point. All right, to the cornerback position, where this guy will be your highest drafted non-Power 5 player, and it is Quinyon Mitchell of Toledo. 6 foot, 196 pounds, was a Bruce Feldman's Freaks List guy, did 225 pounds on the bench 20 plus times, racked up, ran in the 4.3s. I fully expect that based off his tape to be true at the combine when he goes. 27 pass breakups and 6 picks over the last 2 years. Just so absurdly dominant at his level of competition. I love the way he attacks at the catch point too. I mean, those 27 pass breakups aren't a fluke because he is attacking. It reminds me a lot of Damon Arnett. And now Damon Arnett, obviously not a great guy to be comp to, but Damon Arnett, for all his flaws about being able to stay with receivers, was awesome at the catch point. Quinyon Mitchell, similarly awesome at the catch point, but also can stay with guys. And one of the strongest pound-for-pound corners I've ever seen. No one goes through him. So in press coverage, he can be a weapon. I think he can be a weapon in kind of a zone corner too, because he's a very good tackler, can come up and play and tackle kind of like a safety at that size. So big fan of his game. Would not be surprised if he ends up a first rounder in this class. Last position, safety prospect. Not a great safety class, and especially so at the non-power 5 level. But the one guy I'll give a shout out to is Tulane's Kam Pedescleaux. He is probably more slot corner than safety. He's 5'9", 185, has played safety in the past, transferred from Louisiana to Tulane this past year. This past year, though, for Tulane was a slot corner. 10 pass breakups, 2 picks, had a big year for them. Could be a Mike Hilton-esque slot at the next level, because for as much as, the size isn't great, and we're, NFL is probably looking for bigger slots now that can play the run. You saw him play the run at a really high level for Tulane. He not only can get around blocks and back to ball carriers, what I was kind of talking about earlier with Tyrice Knight and linebackers, but he wants to take on blocks. He wants to play a physical game, and he has that twitch and quickness to get downhill and knife into the backfield and make plays before he even gets blocked. And at that size, when you are that short, when you are kind of Antoine Winfield Sr.-esque, and Antoine Winfield Jr., obviously, when you're at that size, it's just tough for guys to block you. 6'7", 6'6" offensive tackle is pulling out in space. You can just duck underneath them. You're at their hips, right? So I think he's a guy who could do it. Now, he probably won't be drafted higher than like the 5th, 6th, 7th, because that's just where guys in that frame sort of go. That's where Mike Hilton went, right? Mike Hilton, I believe, was UDFA coming out. There may be there may be non-power 5 safeties drafted ahead of him in this class, but I still think he could have a real NFL career. So fan of his game, fan of all these guys' games, truthfully. I think all these guys should at least be drafted with, I'll say, Pratt, Vidal. So Michael Pratt, the quarterback from Tulane, Kimani Vidal, the running back from Troy, Ricky White, the wide receiver from UNLV, Dallin Holker, the tight end from Colorado State, Kiran Amegadjie, the tackle from Yale, Christian Haynes, the Connecticut interior offensive lineman, Quinyon Mitchell, the Toledo corner. I feel like could end up top 100 players on my board very well. I think Tyrice Knight, Elijah Roberts are like borderline at this point. Will they end up top 100 players on my board? But there's talent to be had. I'll just say there's talent to be had from some smaller programs. I hate saying smaller schoolers because some of these schools are huge, but smaller programs in this upcoming 2024 NFL draft class. All right, with my top 100 draft board dropping this week, we will be going through tomorrow's episode some of what I believe are the most underrated prospects in this draft class. So I'll be ranking the top 10 underrated prospects on tomorrow's episode. Until then, you've been listening to Renner Ranks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.